Сайн байна уу эрхэм хүндэт үзэгчдээ. Манай соёлын өртөө блогны анхны дугаар гарах гэж байна. Өнөөдрийн манай зочноор ирсэн байгаа Мари Favereau байгаа. Марийн Парис Нонтьер гэдэг их сургуулийн түүхийн профессор. Тэгээд манай Монголын Зөчийн улсын талаар ном бичсэн ирхэн байгаамаа. So hello, Mary.
Hi, Huyanga.
How are you?
I'm very fine, thank you.
Yeah. How do you like it here?
Oh, I like it very much, very much. It's spring already. Huh?
Yeah, that's good. So thank you for coming and accepting our invitation. So let's talk about your book. So I read your book and there was something catchy about the name. So could you please explain us why you named it the Horde? I remember it has sort of a negative connotation, right?
Yes, and actually it was even a fight, with my publisher. I really wanted this term, so it's very important for me and for the history I'm telling in this book. So the term Horde, actually it's a very old term in Asian countries, even in, you find it in Chinese sources, really like thousands of years ago. You find it in Turk sources, in Mongolian sources. So the term itself, it's for nomadic power and nomadic organization. It's a very complex, interesting term. And if you want to translate it in a way, it would be like state, empire, power. But it's very strange because in the West, the term means something that is almost the other way around. It means like a bunch of, barbarians and crazy people, sometimes even like excited animals. It means something very negative, something that is even the contrary of the meaning of state, of organization, something that it would be against state and imperial organization, I would say. So I tried to find out when this term entered the Western languages, and I discovered that this happened in the 13th centuries.
13th.
Yes, 13th centuries, Mongol conquest. Then suddenly this term appeared everywhere in the sources, Arabic sources, Persian sources, Russian sources, Latin, Italian sources also. So it's also interesting to see that in these sources the term was not negative. It means only, there's this new power coming, and something that we've never seen in the West. It's a new type of organization, and we don't have a name for it because, nomadic power, it doesn't exist in the West. So they were very impressed and amazed, and actually they say, okay, well, then let's keep the term Horde. So they use it as Orda, Ordu. There are some, linguistic variation, but that's the same. So the question is, when did it turn into a negative term? Yeah. And probably this happened during colonial times, like lately, really like early 20th century. Then it became really something negative.
So it normalized into a negative word.
Yes, at that time. And my fight was, no, I want this term back on the table because, it's not fair. And it's also the term the people used to name their own organization, their own state, so we need it.
So you're saying that the word Orta is related to the administration types, and it's brought in with the Mongolian conquest.
Yes, it's also connected to society. It's not only about military organization, because people thought for long, historians would say, well, this is military organization. It means the army. But no, when you look at the old narratives, you see that it means also families, nomadic families all together. Mm-hmm. It means also nomadic society in a way. So it's much more than just the army. We really have to understand that it's not only about military history. It's really about how to build up a society, how to be together as a society, as a nomadic society.
Okay, so I see a question here. Whenever people talk about Mongolia, it's mostly related to military, and then they jump from that into barbarianism, like violence and aggression. So when you were doing a study on writing your book, do you see so much aggression, or do you see something else?
Well, I mean, I had to fight a little bit because people thought, oh, well, Mongol conquest is something very, it's connected to military aspect, it's connected to destruction of cities. But as a historian, so I just come with a neutral point of view, you know, I don't know. I just read my sources. I just go to and talk to my colleagues who are doing archaeology and art history. And what I see is new cities built everywhere. I see new artifacts. I see new aesthetics. I see new sciences. I see a lot of development during the 13th, 14th century in all Eurasia. So I had to explain this because, you know, it cannot be only destruction. Of course, war is a bad time for everybody, but then it's not only about that. So that was really the biggest part of my work, something that really triggered me, and I wanted to explain why, in fact, it was not only about destruction and change this image, right?
As I grew up myself, I hear these stories that nomads don't build cities. So you're saying that we Mongolians were building big cities?
Yes, so city question is very important. So actually, there are two aspects. One is, okay, in history, we thought for long that, you know, you don't want to be a nomad when you're in power. When you're in power, you have to sedentarize. That was like the old conventional discourse of, you know, what is better for a ruler? Well, sure, it's better to have a big city and to sit in it and sedentarize. But I look at my source and was like, no, these Mongol rulers were extremely powerful. They could do whatever they wanted, but they never sedentarized. They want to be nomad because it's part of them. They are proud of it. It's part of their pride. It's the way they rule. It's the way they, you know, harness even their territory. So it's part of them, and it's part of the Horde.
So it's a different type of living, and it's a different identity.
Yes, exactly. And they want it. It's a real choice. That's also what it's not that they have no choice. You know, they don't know how to. No, they could sedentarize, but they don't want to. But it doesn't mean that they are against city. That's the thing. In fact, they really like city. Cities, you know, bring to them is like a good place for sedentary people, for their sedentary subjects, for instance. It could be a good place for craftsmen. It could be a good place for religious people, also for visitors, people coming, you know, foreigners who are, you know, not aware of how to do in, you know, nomadic life is difficult for them. They understand that. So they want cities, and they will really put funding into new buildings, building new cities. And not only they would restore old cities, like even, I don't know, Baghdad, for instance, was partially restored by the Mongols and other places, but they also built completely new cities. So in the part of the world I'm working on, so it's really like the western part of the Mongol Empire, it's Russia today. Well, in the Volga Valley, they built many cities. One is very famous, Sarai, and it's something the Mongol decided on. I mean, it's not the sedentary who came and say, no, it was a Mongol idea that, you know, they had a big city there in Lower Volga.
So you're saying that nomadic lifestyle is a part of the identity, and the rule is also nomadic.
The rule is nomadic, and that's also something important to understand, that you can administrate a whole huge, complex empire while being nomads. Because for a very long time, people would, you know, historians thought, well, okay, you can conquer an empire as a nomad, but then when it comes to administration, it's sophisticated. So then you have to rely on, you know, the Chinese subject or the Russian subject or the Christian subject, blah, blah. But no, actually, nomads can rule on horseback, right? And they are very good at that. And that's also very specific to their, you know, kind of power. That's why I like the word horde also. It explains that, you know, you rule sedentary populations, fine, as nomads. And also, you know, you can have an agrarian empire. They were, you know, producing, I don't know, a lot of weeds, or, you know, they produced also a lot of grains in the Mongol Empire, a lot of grains. But still, the rulers and the administrators are nomads.
Can I elaborate on this nomadic rule again, administration? And so how would a nomadic empire rule? How would they sort of make sure their administration is working? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so actually there are two kind of movement in the two kind of mobilities in the empire, at least in this part of the empire. So one is the Horde mobility, I call it that way. So all these people walking with the animals, the herds, and the people along the river valleys. So in all of Eurasia, you have big river valleys, and Irtysh River, Volga River I mentioned, but Don River, also even Danube River up to the west. Yeah. And so the nomad would walk near the river, and they would walk. Of course, they would go for winter. They would go south, and for summer they would go north. So there's this mobility always, but at the same time they have to connect. Among each other, among all the hordes in the empire. There were many hordes along this river valley. So how do they connect?
How do they connect,
exactly.
Yes.
So it's, at that time, it's really face-to-face administration, face-to-face diplomacy. So there are a lot of visits. There are a lot of exchange, like really personal exchange between administrators and rulers and, imperial family members. So they use a big communication system that we call, or in English language, we call it YAM or YAM Horde. And it's something that there's nothing comparable in any empire of the world at that time. The Mongols achieved a huge connection at the level of the empire through what it would be called posts, the kind of, posts on horses or something like that. So actually you would, if you travel and you're an official, you would have access every 30 kilometers in some areas, in the most difficult areas, every 30 kilometers you would have access to fresh horses, you would have access to water, you would have access to a translator if you need, you could rest. And this is really an official station. And people would wait for you. You would have to show something because it's not for everybody. It's for officials. So you would show a metal, kind of metal passport or exactly, Gerek, and on which it's written like, you're an official. You have to. People have to serve you there. So you would use this system to communicate, but also to travel in the empire from a horde to another, from a point to another. And this system really covered the whole empire from, Mongolia today, up to China, of course, across Iran, up to what is Russia today, across Siberia, up to the Danube River. So it's really a huge...
So it's a big network that connects the whole empire.
Exactly, it's a big network. And also this interesting thing is, if you want to sort of find, because that's something my students ask often, like, in archaeology, can we find the building of the Horde network? But no, in fact, it's very hard to find. There are some buildings, some places, but most of the time it was a nomadic network in a sense that when it's winter, the network would be, the post would be really like in the south of the river valleys, all these, stations. But when it's summer, all these stations would be more up north. So they move also the station. So it's not that they build, hotels. No? It's different system. But then there's this flexibility in the system, something that is really unseen in other empires at this scale, because they were small Horde before. It existed in Central Asia, in other places, but not
at
such
this
a scale. Yes.
So if it reached this mega scale, that means it was rebuilt. It was a new network system was planned out, right?
Yes, exactly. So and this system also so it's interesting because we have witnesses who use this system, foreign travelers using it and telling about it because they've never seen that. Also,
can you tell me an example?
Yeah. Well, William of Freiburg, for instance, who was a monk, a Franciscan monk, and he used this system, part of it. And so he says, this system is amazing because also you have to they help you to cross rivers, and so it's really a big organization. So it can be what we see also, thanks to his, these witnesses, that it can be very fast. Like if you're really an official working for the ruler, you have to go very fast and give like a message or letter or something. But it can be slow if you are someone that is you're older, like Rubuk. You also, if you're merchants carrying a lot of precious goods or heavy loads, you can go also slowly. It's not necessarily a system for speed, because sometimes it doesn't make sense to speed, right?
Yes.
So there are different speed within this system. So yes.
So you were saying there were people that go between the Yamurtos. We call it now Ulach. And there was one person that would stamp, the Targa, so we say in Mongolian nowadays. And you were saying also that there were translators.
They were translators because the whole idea of the Mongol Empire, what I found very interesting is that it's not going for harmonization and uniformity like we would do now with nation states. Nation state is, one people, one language, one ethnicity, it's one. But no, Mongol Empire is multicultural, multi-religious, it admits diversity. So, but if you want to administrate different kind of people, they have to communicate in a way or another. So they admit also different languages, different scripts, and they use a lot of translators. Translators would have a job immediately in the Mongol Empire. They need translators. They like also to have conversion tables, for coins, for weight system. So even they have some kind of dictionaries for the merchants. So they could communicate, so that's also part of the way they rule. They don't want everybody to be the same. It's not their idea. They want just that everybody to be able to communicate, and they provide the tools for communication.
So in contemporary times, it's a very sort of top-down admin system. So you're saying from the Mongol Empire times, it wasn't as sort of monocultural, but it supported your culture, and you could be part of the system with your own cultural difference.
Absolutely. So the idea is like everybody has, different cultures, different religion also, and this is just a normal thing. So the state should accommodate these differences. So how they do it, especially with religion, we still have documents that can, explain how they rule different, religious communities. So actually, they would give a permission for these communities to sort of have their own rituals and organize their religious life the way they want. And they would also give special exemptions for clergies, Buddhists, Taoists, Muslim clergies, also Christians, whether they were Nestorians or Orthodox or Franciscans. They would all receive tax exemptions and exemptions for military conscriptions, because if you're a religious person, then you need to have time for your, to pray, and you don't go to war, right? So they had all these contracts, and they in exchange. So that the question is interesting. Question is, it's not simply like tolerance or something more complex than that. It's really imperial policies. So the idea is like, okay, we give you these contracts. You can have your religions and all, but then in exchange, we want your loyalty. We want your supports, And so it's very interesting to see.
So it's a collaboration.
Absolutely, yeah. And so all these religious communities, the clergy there, they really all supported the Mongols because it was a good deal for them, and they also had visited the Khan at this court, at this mobile court. They would visit, sometimes for months, and exchange also at court. So the Mongol ruler liked religious debates. So he would put, Muslim, for instance, ulema, Muslim dignitaries, Buddhists, Christian, and saying just start talking, and that's enjoying, the scientific and religious debate at court. And the other interesting thing is those religious communities, because they could have these tax exemptions. They had some money, right? They spare money. So what do they do with their money? So that was one of the big questions I had during my research. I was like, wait, okay, they have money. What do they do with their money? But then they built more churches. They built monasteries, temples. They built also, they built for their cities. So they had new schools also. They would had also develop all sorts of system, how do you call that, hydraulic system, for water system. They would, develop their own cities, building in it and just
so this freedom of administration of religious entities actually makes them flourish.
It makes them flourish. That's why, if you just consider that a Mongol empire is conquest and destruction in the 13th century, you don't understand why in the 14th century it's what we call Pax Mongolica, the Great Mongol Exchange, when you see it's a huge period of exchange for trade and a kind of medieval globalization. You cannot understand that. How those cities, where do they come from? I mean, where do people find time and money to build cities?
If they're under dictatorship.
Exactly. So that was really one of the aspects I tried to work on in my book.
So this shows like if the contemporary connotation is destruction, barbarianism, and but the facts speak different. There was a flourishing of religion and trade that you're saying, and new cities were built.
Yes.
So let me ask you a few questions. I understand you specialize in the Ulus of Zuchi, right?
Yes, actually.
So let's talk about this. I saw a few yamurtos in Iran, so places that have been used like them, and I saw names the same under the name Yam.
Yeah.
So my question is, like this contemporary understanding of Mongolian empire having one Silk Road, but from your explanation right now, I can understand that a yamurto was a big network. Then was there another road that was connecting those?
Yes. So that's also something I really didn't expect to find, but I discovered during my research was the importance of the northern, what I call the northern road, but the northern part of the Mongol Empire, because we have a lot of documentation on the south, what we call the Southern Road. It means it's a road, maritime road between what is southern China today, and then across the Indian Ocean, and then going, to Saudi, or going to the Middle East, and going also through Iran, what is Iran and what is Azerbaijan today. And so this is the Southern Road. It's many maritime roads, and it's a well-known road. But then in my work, because I work on the north, I discovered that there were also what I call a northern roads. Actually, it's a lot of branches. It's a complex network of roads. But across southern Siberia, actually, travelers, but merchants could, trade and cross. And the Mongols developed this northern road. So we would go from more or less what is Mongolia today to up to Eastern Europe, up to what is Germany today, up to, and even up to England, in fact. So they had this big connection. And the key, how can I put that, like the most important goods on this road, they were different kind of goods, but one is fur. Fur trade was key. And we always speak about silk trade, which is important. There was also cotton trade and textile trade in general, but fur trade was even more important, I think. Actually, it was really like when you want to show you're a wealthy person, even in the Middle East, the first thing you need is, fur from the north. They would use fur also everywhere in their houses at that time. So it's really part of everyday life, but of course it shows status. So if you're part of the elite in the Islamic world, in Europe, in the Mongol Empire, you have furs, special furs. And so that's really, this commodity shouldn't be overlooked. Like, it's really the most important one. And it's one of, that's why this Northern Road was also so important.
So if there's a Mongolian fur road, so did you name it the Fur Road, or?
Yeah, we can call it the Fur Road.
Yeah,
the Northern Road.
Yeah. So you're saying also like the Fur Road is going on the north side, and then there's what we call the Maritime and the Silk Roads on the which is almost parallel. Is there a road connecting? Because you were saying like in the Middle East they would show their royal status with fur.
Yeah.
So I think there's a connection between them too. Would it be?
There's a connection, and that's why the Ulus of Zuchi is very important, because Ulus of Zuchi connects the Middle East to the Northern Road, the Fur Road.
Okay.
Yes, because in the Ulus of Zuchi...
So it's part of their administration.
Exactly. Yeah, and they developed the connection through, especially through what is the Caucasus today. There's a road there. There was a road there, and a very important road. But also they had a connection with the Mediterranean world through the Black Sea. So actually the Mongols in Ulus of Zuchi, they had a contract with the Byzantine emperor, who was in Istanbul today, in Constantinople. And, well, the Byzantine emperor did not really have choice, actually. So they negotiated with him, like, the Mongol traders, or their Mongol, I mean, maybe partners, trade partners, they are allowed to cross what we call the Black Sea Straits, Bosphorus and Dardanelles, those straits, that connect, that link the Black Sea area to the Mediterranean Sea. So this is like a corridor, maritime corridor in between.
So it was owned by the Byzantines?
They watched it. They watch and they control, like this door. It's a gate, okay? It's a maritime gate. The Byzantines control it. But the Ulus of Zuchi controlled the Byzantine. And they said, okay, well, it's fine, we're in good terms. We're not going to, we are in good terms, fine, but just let this door open for our traders. And the traders go across this maritime, corridor. Many of them were coming from Egypt. And yes, many of them were coming from Egypt. There's a lot of trade exchange between Egypt, which is Mamluk Sultanate at that time, and the north of the Mongol Empire, which we call the Horde. And they exchange, like, every year, several boats would, cross and, bring new commodities and, but not only that, like, they would exchange cultural aspects also, yes.
It's interesting, very much. I also noticed, so you were saying from this road that connects the Middle East to the Ulus of Zuchi, and I remember reading in your book about the Sarai of Bat, and that it was a city that was actually doing its own ceramics, and that was a, how would you say it, infrastructure on it. So could you elaborate on that? Was that also part of the trade to the Mamluks?
Yeah, I mean, part of it. We found some Mamluk artifacts, certainly in the Horde, so not so much in the lower Volga area in Sarai, but especially in Crimea, because Crimea was a very important region. It was completely part of, the Ulus of Zuchi, and there were Mongol cities there, and you can still see mosques, and some of them are really were built probably by Mamluk craftsmen. So you can see Mamluk style on one of these mosques still today. So, and we know also that the Mamluk traders and ambassadors would go to Sarai Bat. They would go to the Khan's court. So we know also the way how they entered the Mongol Empire, how they were welcomed by an official who would guide them actually to not only to Sarai Bat as a city, but also to the Khan's camp, because the Khan is not in the city, he's camping, it's all right. So, and the Mamluk always say, well, we know our way back, but we never know where to go exactly, because we never know where exactly the Khan is with his courts, so they really need guides, to take them there. And and they describe really the way, how many days it takes, what kind of horse you need, or what kind of cards you need to use to cross the steppe, and then they report to their sultan, to the Mamluk sultan. That's why we got these sources actually, thanks to the reports the ambassadors made. So
I have another question on this. So if Mongolians used a Yamurshto network of administration, they would supply some basic administration documents for that. For example, maps or some tables when you should maybe collect taxes. Did you find any of those?
Well, for this part of the Mongol Empire, we don't have many of these administrative documents. We have some, but rather for 14th century and even early 15th centuries, because the Mongols stayed in power in this part of the, what is Russia today, up to the 15th century. And they produced some documents, but only few of them are still preserved today. They were kept by the people who received them. Those, if you were granted a contract or some decrees by the ruler, Mongol ruler, you would keep it in your family because it's a proof, of your status. And in families still up to the 19th century in Crimea, for instance, Tatar family kept those documents.
Oh, really?
Because it was a proof that their ancestors were there. Yeah, that Batran gave them, granted them lands, for instance, or statues, and they were very, not only proud, but I mean, it was a proof of land ownership, and so they kept them. That's actually what triggered my first interest for the Horde, the Ulus of Zuchi. I found some of those documents. Late 14th century or something, I was like, what? These documents is still used in the 18th century, 19th century? Oh, how come? I mean, are they real documents? Or I thought maybe they're fake documents or what's that? And then I found out, I dig into this, and then I found out, no, these documents were indeed granted by the Mongols at that time because they reorganized the whole region of what is Russia today. It was really all fragmentary, and the Mongol made it, more modern in a way. And they produce those written documents, because nomad can produce written documents. So something I have to tell to people who have no idea. I think nomad, they don't write, and well, of course they do, and they use writing system, to rule. So we still have them with a seal. Seal, you can see big seal of so that's the Han seal, and it's really beautiful. It's beautiful. I think it's great. And what we have also is diplomatic letters. And especially interesting that in France we have two very important diplomatic letters sent by Mongol rulers. They are still in the National Archive now. You can see them.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Very long letters, scroll, so you can make several meters long. In Bichik script.
Mongol Bichik.
Yeah, Mongol Bichik. So these letters are interesting. They were sent to the King of France. Because there were connections between the Kingdom of France and the Mongol Empire since mid-13th century, since the time of William of Freiburg. So Franciscan was sent as an ambassador for the King of France to the Mongol ruler. And so we had this connection, and the French kept the letter. They were really impressed by the letters and this new script. And this is very interesting diplomacy. And in one of the letters, one that is from early 14th century, sent to Philippe le Bel. So Philippe le Bel is like a very important king in French history, one who was supposed to be the one who founded like the modern kingdom of France and stuff like that. So he's even a great figure in French national history, let's say. So he received this letter sent by the Mongol rulers, and in the letter it said that the Khan advised the French to be in better terms with his Christian neighbors, because in Europe it's very fragmented, and the Christian world is everybody is fighting each other, so it's a very fragmented world. While the Mongol Empire is more at peace at that time, early 14th century. It's really what we call Pax
So that's
Mongolica.
actually a very interesting artifact if you're saying that. Like this contemporary connotation of Mongolian Empire being barbaric, for example. It's just the opposite. Actually, we're telling others to be more social.
Yeah. No, exactly. And you know what? Even more interesting in the letter, the Khan made reference to the Horde system.
Okay.
And he said, now we, all Mongols, are at peace among each other. Or you should do like us. And when he expressed peace, in Mongol terms, it means he says, well, our Horde stations are all connected. That is, it's like one all network. We connect through the Horde, and this is the reflection of peace. This means peace. Yeah,
it is peace.
Yeah. And so he advised.
And exchange.
Yeah, Peace and exchange, exactly.
Yeah.
So that it's really in the letter. So it's
That's beautiful.
yeah, it is, I think.
So that's very interesting, Mari. So if Mongolia was already at peace and there was trade going on with no problems and people were socializing without any conflict, and I read about the Hanseatic League and that its development and their administration and the judges, for example, were related to the Mongol Empire. Could you please tell me, is it connected to the same idea that we just discussed?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Hanseatic League developed rather in the 15th century, but we can see, so it's in the northern part of Europe. It connects Scandinavian countries basically to what is Germany today, and it's very much focused especially in the early 15th century, also on fish and salt trade. And so it's really the Northern Europe area where also we think that, you know, modern globalization came from. And it's very like seen as modern trade and so on. But when you look at the history of the Horde, of the Ulus of Zuchi, you realize that already in the 14th century and even 13th century, the Mongol rulers asked northern traders, especially near in the city of Novgorod, where you had German traders and Slavic traders all together. He asked them to work together for trade. And so there were a lot of competition between those, traders, of course. And for the Mongol Khan, the traders had to work with each other. So he would ask the traders to, open, like Novgorodian, to open the doors of the city to German traders, let us to be at peace with each other in this part of what is Russia today. And we really have the documents when you see that, for the Mongol ruler, it's not, he wants, things to circulate and people to circulate. So he is subject to be at peace with each other, because it's his own interest. Huh?
Yeah. And it's sort of showing how to socialize in a way, how to do trade.
Yeah, exactly. So the interesting aspect is, in a way, it's a forced socialization. Huh? Of course, people, they want to stay in their community, they want to fight, it makes sense. But even I spoke about, religious debates. Well, religious among each other, they also have competition. Scientists among each other, they have competition. But in the eyes of the Mongol rulers, this competition is not necessarily good. If it triggered more production, it's okay. But otherwise, no. People have to, talk to each other and speak to each other. So they really forced cooperation between their subjects. And people complain, we have this, Persian knowledge of cartography, for instance. They don't want to necessarily share with Chinese cartographers, but the Mongol rulers say, no, you have to share because I want you to build up the best cartography product at the end, or the best maps of my empire. And so the Mongol rulers forced their subjects to work together. And that's very interesting aspect because...
So did it bring any goods? Did it develop in a way? Or did it go into more conflict?
Well, then actually it worked quite well, especially in the first part of the 14th century. We know that science developed a lot, that also this knowledge really produced new artifacts, new objects, new aesthetics in terms of art, manuscript production, painting production. All sorts of new aspect flourished. Also because on the Mongol side there's some sort of openness. They were happy to see new projects, new things. Okay. So they were not narrow-minded in that sense. It was very open. So that's very fascinating when you see also among court historians working for the Mongols, they could write huge world history the way they never did before. So there was some kind of freedom. Okay?
So it was also a catalyst. So was it funded by the Mongol Empire? Yeah,
it was funded by the Mongol Empire. That's something important to understand, because what I hear as a historian often is, okay, all this new knowledge and new development, this is not Mongol. This is because of the Persian, because of the Chinese, because of the Russian, because of the Franciscan friars. Well, yeah, but who is in charge and who's funding? the Mongols. And not only they found new observatories for astronomy, for instance, or new religious buildings, but they found on a very long term. For Mongol, it was important to think about future generations. So you see that a ruler would not only think about himself, but he would think about lineage. It's exactly legacy lineage. So this connection between past, present, and future is key in the way they rule. So they would found for generation and generation, which is really, I mean, look at modern world today. We as scholars always fight to have founding for more than 4 years in a row or 5 years in a row. But imagine founding for 100 years for some project. I mean, science and research needs time. It's always a slow process. If you don't have long-term fundings, it doesn't work. So that's really the big Mongol input.
Yeah, I do understand the connection between the Mongolian sort of mentality and like this psychological difference of thinking what we should do for our future generation. This is something that we grow up with, so it is sort of imposed on us, that a way of thinking. So we grow up thinking, what are we going to do for our kids? So it's sort of I really like this outlook to the future all the time. It's in a way very positive. Can you read this sort of positivity too in your when you do research?
When I see is, of course, there's a vision of social harmony in even in Mongol administration. It doesn't mean that it's all about peace and everybody's friendly. We shouldn't see it that way, of course, huh? But then it's still a power that organizes itself. So it's a big powerful state. But at the same time, there's this notion of social harmony. People need to receive their share in the society, even though they are sedentary people, or even if they are nomadic people, if they are poor people, everybody has a share. So if things circulate, their share is going to be better, and there will be more for everybody. Of course, you receive according to your rank, to your status. If you're higher status, you receive more, but you distribute more also. That's the way they see it. So sometimes people tell me, oh, well, maybe it's the origin of capitalism in a way. That's this circulation of things. Yes and no. Yes, in a sense that, okay, more circulations, building roads, trade connection, trade contract, coinage. Mongol were, producing a lot of coinage. It forced the Russian to use coins and stuff like that. So, okay, this maybe could be some sort of pre-capitalism mind, even institutions. But at the same time, at that period, the Mongols, they have also a more, let's say, a vision of social harmony that I think is something completely different. That's something that belongs to them. They think about, it connects them to the afterlife also. There are also a lot of belief and a lot of respect for their ancestors, and also for the future of the lineage, so the future of the people. So they have this really, they are aware of the world around them and of the impact of their rule on the world. So I think that's why it's also different. It's but the effect of it, I call it sometimes Mongol globalization. So it means that in this period, 13th, 14th century, we see connection in Eurasia that we've never seen before. Exactly.
The Urto.
Urto. Yeah, and also we have this idea of Silk Road. Yeah, fine, but it's much bigger than the Silk Road.
Is it?
Yeah, it's much bigger.
Can you see it nowadays? Any sort of usually, like, history would leave its mark somewhere. So, are there any city names, for example? Maybe some Urtos developed into bigger cities.
Yeah, we think that some Orto develop into cities, especially in Russia, what is Russia today. So in Crimea, also, it's clearly they were cities that were start being built at the time of the Mongols, and also in administration, some terms and some way of doing were kept after the Mongols, after the big Mongol period, the big Mongol Empire. But this question of legacy is complicated and difficult to study. We need more study on it, because after the 14th century, after the 15th century, then we have many documents were destroyed, disappeared, either by new administrations, new powers coming, and wanted to erase the Mongol legacy and the memory of it, or also because it's hard to, with harsh weather or whatever, with war, it's always difficult to keep old documents. So even if they are, good quality papers, if family cannot keep it, then.
I guess sometimes history is not always sort of kept in a material way. For example, I remember that in Russian, for example, the postman who delivers from one point to the other is called yamshik.
Yeah, exactly. The term yamshik clearly it's from the Mongol period, and there are also terms also of many places in what is Ukraine today that is come from the Mongol period also. So I think if we look at we dig into the language. Yeah. There's this layer there of this Mongol layer that also that's why it concerns also European history, Middle East, all of Asia. Yeah.
So after our discussion, I see that there is a big imprint of the Mongolians in Europe, and the trade and a lot of administration has been changed during the Mongol times. Mm-hmm. And my question is, how much does the West nowadays know about the Mongols?
Well, I think they know something, but not enough, and sometimes wrong things. They have wrong ideas sometimes about Mongol history, and they don't know enough about, especially Mongol Empire, which is something I'm working on in my country, in France. I mean. Me, as an example, mm-hmm. I've never heard of the Mongol Empire before, I turned 20-something at the university. Suddenly I discovered, wow, this big empire, bigger than the Roman Empire, more, bigger than Genghis Khan, bigger than Alexander the Great. Or, all this was like, wow, how come I've never heard of it? It's part of world history. It's really a step in world history. So it should be, I think, it should be known and should be taught at school in a way or another. So I work with my colleagues in France and teacher network. We work now on the new notion of what was the Mongol Empire and who was Genghis Khan. Mm-hmm. We want the children to know a little bit, at least, of this period of history, a little bit more on nomads as well, and so we can change their vision because it's distorted vision, or they know nothing. So they need to know at least something, and this is really a good connection between researchers and university professors like me and high school teachers, for instance. We work together, and everybody wants to know more. They ask, for instance, wow, but how come this empire was organized? Were they really nomad? Is it possible? Oh, but I heard that Baghdad was destroyed. Is it true that Mongols destroyed all the cities? Or I bring new materials, and they are so happy to hear about it. And there's really, it's not a top-down pressure. It's really people in the public, they ask for more information. They say, how come we've never heard of it? And they are very excited about it. So in the classroom, I think we're going to have, we have to produce for them more, videos, textbooks for school. So I do a lot in schools, and I have to say that I think the children and grown-up also are very, very interested.
I think this is a sort of a common problem with maybe the West and actually in Mongolia. And we came out with a new magazine. We're also doing a project with this called Cultural Urto. So we're trying to distribute our, I'm sure you are aware of the content. And do you think it's also could be a good way of communicating and mediating knowledge?
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely fantastic idea. I really love the idea that as a researcher, I would not talk only to my expert colleagues, but I would talk to, everybody. Because everybody deserves to know the new result of research, because we have so many new information now. Since 20 years, we really found so many new artifacts in Mongolia, for instance, new objects. We found new sources. We are writing new books. And this is not only for our colleagues. It doesn't make sense, right? It has to be for everybody. We have to share this knowledge. So I really appreciate the fact that we have journals. We have cultural journals, and I think it's really key to, we provide more information, then we get the question from the people, because my students, they always have great questions. I'm like, oh, I never thought about it. I have to explain this, and then it's a debate. It's not only like I'm teaching, I'm lecturing.
It's not like a clustered
knowledge. No. Exactly.
So you're just actually connecting with people like an Horde.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I think there's a lot on Mongol history outside of Mongolia, because you see the size of the Mongol Empire. It was so huge. It covered such a great part of Eurasia. But more than that, that what we call the Mongol exchange, so the globalization, it connects to France, for instance, through diplomacy and trade. We have Mongol artifacts in France that were sent by Mongol ambassadors, carried by them to the French king, for instance. And this, I mean, it's not known enough in France, but it's not known enough in Mongolia too. So I think that's what I really like it here. It's a great platform, like, you know, to share, and also to, maybe we can hear from people in some country, they would say, oh, I've been to this museum, I've discovered this new object, or I've been to this place and I discovered new archaeological sites, and then we can share all this. And it's good for researchers and it's good for the public, I think.
It's so fascinating to hear about that and what was happening in Ulus of Zuchi. And I'm sure there are a lot of people in Mongolia wanting to know more about your research. And I hear, would your book be translated into Mongolian?
Yeah, my book will be translated thanks to Mansoudar. They have the rights, and they are translating it right now. So it should be out in May or very soon.
May?
Yeah, normally in May.
And
I'm so happy with it. It's really great. And also, you know, it was really nice to talk with the translators and to exchange, because we had to find out some words, how we will, you know, translate them into Mongolian language, and also it is new research. So even me, actually, I have to say, this book, so I'm French. I wrote this book in English, and I had recently to translate it into French, my own language. And it was so difficult, because there's no research on that. So it's like a new vocabulary. I didn't know how to translate it into French. But I think the work we do with translators is extremely important, because it's a work on words. Which word are we going to use? And how do we have to create new words? And I like this aspect in my work. It's a very creative aspect with the language, right? Yes.
I actually liked how you used the Mongolian terms the way they are in Mongolian terms, because when you translate it, I think the connotation also changes, right?
Absolutely, it's true. Yeah, that's why it's a lot of discussion. Yeah. Like, oh, shall I translate that way? Maybe that way, and then we come up with new ideas. So I really love this translation moment. Oh, it's so much work. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there should be maybe a cultural exchange again. Maybe we should now call the Roman Horde, for example.
Yeah, the Roman Horde, I think. Yeah, it's a very good idea. Yeah. Sure.
Okay, thank you, Mari.
Thank you so much, Yonga. It was such a pleasure. Yeah,
it is a pleasure. Yeah. And to our followers or listeners, I'm sure we will meet again, maybe with more detailed, or maybe in a new place. So
yeah, sure.
Let's look for the future.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming, Mari.
Thank you.